Okay, folks, let's dive into chapter 32, and that is contemporary art worldwide. Essentially, everything up until now. And there's a disclaimer in the information at the beginning of the chapter that says that, it would be unjust to try to cram everything into this chapter because it's still developing today. So anything that's being made today is part of this contemporary art worldwide. But with it still developing, we can at this point in art history kind of break it down into six main categories. And those six main categories or those groups, are personal and group identity. That would be number one. Second would be political and social commentary. Third would be representation and abstraction. Fourth would be electronic and digital media. Five is site-specific and installation art. And the last one is architecture. So we're going to break down all those six different groups in this chapter. And we're going to start first with African American art in particular. And then we're going to discuss gender and sexuality art. Then we're going to talk about national identity. Then we're going to look at political, social commentary, representation and abstraction, abstract painting and sculpture, and then electronic and digital media, site-specific, and then architecture. So there's a lot crammed in here into this last chapter before we get into other developments that are happening around the world in very specific regions after around 1800. Okay? So we're first going to talk about African American art, and we're going to look at figure 32-4. We're going to look at Willie and Napoleon leading the army over the Alps from 2005. And I want to first start by mentioning that Willie is the one who did the self-portraits for the Obamas whenever the Obama's administration was running the country. And so he's the one who painted both Barack and Michelle Obama and their portraits, because at the end of every tenure of a president, they have their self-portraits made and then hung in the White House. And he's the one who actually did their self-portraits. You can go online and check them out when you get a chance. And what Willie wanted to do is he wanted to set to correct any discriminatory imbalance of African American art not being in art history. And he had a very specific way and organization and composition that he did to make sure that African American individuals are present within this field of art history. And he even calls it the field of power. So he places prominent African American individuals and self-portraits, as well as himself being self-portrait in these scenes, to kind of supplant, if you will, the lack of African American presence in art history. So how he does that is he will use young urban African American male portraits, or he'll create young urban African American male portraits. And through this field of power, again, that's in quotations, that's what he's labeled it, he places these young African Americans in urban outfits, like you see here with Napoleon leading the army over the Alps. You can see that he has urban outfit. It's what he's donning, that's what he's wearing. And the reason he's doing that is to show this important historical display with the backgrounds in particular. And what he's doing here is he's taking a painting that was originally done by David, which was Napoleon leading the army over the Alps, which was the original painting, but it was Napoleon on the horse. And here, Willie has African American male in the urban outfitting placed on the horse versus that of Napoleon Bonaparte. So he also, I want to mention that it's not a mechanical copy of David's Napoleon leading the army over the Alps. So you can't say that Willie is just copying directly what David did. No, he changes it. and he does that intentionally with writing specific names in the landscape on the rocks. The rocks are very similar, the horse is very similar, but the young man that's on top of the horse is much different than Napoleon. And plus, we're using that urban outfitting to represent the contemporary African American culture. And also, he creates a background that's different than the actual Alps, the Swiss Alps that were present in that in David's painting. I'm not going to say the original painting. I'm going to say David's painting because this is an original painting, just like David's painting was original. Okay, so you can't say that David's was the original painting. You can say the title, but not the painting, because this is a totally different representation of a similar subject matter. Okay, so what he does is he creates this wallpaper like backdrop behind the young African American male on the horse and the horse itself, which separates the painting from being David's painting. So he creates a totally different scene altogether to contemporize it. And also, he does register and lock it to history and the importance of history by using a gilded frame, Gilted, a gilded frame, to connect to the actual art history of referencing David. But again, it's not a mechanical copy of David's, and we know that by him using the wallpaper background to recall modern times and not historical times. So he has it framed in history, but then he makes it his own and more contemporary commentary on the importance of having African American figures present in this, again, field of power. And he's calling art history this field of power. And now it's his job to make sure that 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 the African American representation is here and is present in these times, starting now, and or starting many decades back, of course, like over 60, 70 years, and still getting stronger and stronger, rightfully so. And so that's Willie, and that's what he's doing. Again, don't forget to go online and check out his self-portraits that he did for the Obamas. They're really great. The Barack Obama is amazing. I haven't looked at Michelle Obama's very much, but Barack Obama's self-portrait is really phenomenal. Okay, someone else that we're going to look at in the African American art movement, in this contemporary African American art movement forward, is Faith Ringgold. Ringgold. And what Faith wanted to do, what Ringgold wanted to do, we're looking at, I'm sorry, figure 32.5, Who's Afraid of Aunt Jemima, from 1983, is Ringgold wanted to show the challenges of African American women in particular. And she wanted these are considered quilts, so it's acrylic on canvas with fabric borders, quilted, is she wanted to create commentary on racial prejudices. And how she did that here is she used fabric to point to the domestic sphere of what African American women were typically placed in domestic environment. And she also, so that's why she's using the quilted material, but she's also doing it because she collaborated with her mother. So her mother, her mama, was the one who helped her sew these quilted compositions. She did the painting and her mother collaborated and taught her how to do the sewing. So it shows this generational lineage of artistic endeavors. So she collaborated with her mother, and her mother's the one who pretty much made this canvas for her, and then she came in and then she painted it. And she also did the sewing as well alongside her mother. So it's a great way to show and comment about the engagement and the homogeny between mother and daughter in the African American community, and with her specifically, with Faith herself and her mom directly working alongside, and they're assisting one another in this incredible artwork. Also, Faith Ringgold was a teacher. She worked for about 18 years in Harlem, New York. So she was a school teacher of a lot of young kids in the area, and so she's really become influential in the Harlem post Harlem Renaissance. We talked about the Harlem Renaissance before, looking at Jacob Lawrence, and now Faith Ringgold and also Willie are going to be continuing that Harlem influx of African American art. So what Who's Afraid of Aunt Jemima is about, it's a story quilt is what they're called. They're called story quilts, STORYQUILT, and it's devoted to her late mother. Okay, so this was made after her mother passed away. And what it is, it makes a narrative by combining images and words. So there's all these different images throughout the composition of the quilt, and there's also words. Now, what the images are is actually an antithesis to what has been created as a narrative for Aunt Jemima. All right, this servitude narrative with Aunt Jemima, and what Faith has done is she's created a new narrative through this quilt. Again, trying to change these challenging stereotypes of prejudices in this case, upon prominent figures like Aunt Jemima. So what she's done is she's made Jemima a successful businesswoman throughout the chronology of the images bordering this quilt, and not what societal narratives have placed upon Aunt Jemima. She's creating a successful businesswoman narrative, so kind of breaking away from these prejudices and these stereotypes. And then within and next to the individuals that are placed on this quilt is a black dialect that's built in these squares around the figures. And the dialect, if you zoom in and try to look at it, speaks to a African American dialect that emphasizes the importance of moving forward, becoming successful, enduring, pushing discrimination and racial inequality aside, and breaking away from it. So that's why these are called story quilts. It gives a historical definition of certain individuals, develops a new positive wave of narration about an individual, and then pushes forward into the future. And that's what Faith Ringgold was all about with these, again, story quilts. She also made a couple books, I believe, based off of her quilts. She's done so much. She's just amazing, so prolific, and just a fresh, a breath air, just so sweet and so kind too. From the videos that I've had a chance to watch, with any of these artists, YouTube, just plug in their names, and you'll probably get to hear them speak directly in the video, especially from this chapter, because many of these artists are luckily still alive, and they can keep making all this incredible art like Ringgold and Willie. Unfortunately, the next person we're talking about is no longer alive, and we're going to move into one of the second groups, and that's gender and sexuality. And we're going to look at figure 32.8, and this is Mapplethorpe. During this, with these groups of gender and sexuality, now again, it's not grouped for the sake of separating or segregating or dividing. It's just to kind of break down and try to funnel down more specific themes within different groups. I also want to say that even though I'm talking about 6 specific types of categories, I should say, of art, it's all flowing together. Keep that in mind. It's all flowing together. So gender, sexuality, African American art, it's all flowing together. Digital, electronic art, national identity, political, social commentary, all these categories are flowing together in each of these different groups. So keep that in mind. For example, gender and sexuality is going to be heavily based on feminism and homosexuality. So feminism can be found in African American art as well, like what Ringgold was doing with Who's Afraid of Aunt Jemima, right? So there's elements of feminism in there as well, and respect for womankind. So do know that all these things are incorporated and all interlaced together, like a melting pot, right? which is wonderful. So with Mapplethorpe, unfortunately, is no longer alive, and I'll explain why. And what he would do is, well, first he studied drawing, sculpture, and painting, but then he got a hold of a Polaroid camera, and that changed everything. It was all about photography at that point. And his photos actually were up for congregational debate, and I'll explain why. But mostly his photos are going to be these self-portrait, a series of self-portraits, like we see here in Figure 32.8, but also homoerotic and sadomasochistic paintings, or photographs in particular. And it's those themes that gave rise to congregational debate. And the reason is because he had a show and an exhibition that was funded by the National Endowment for the Arts, which is a federal funded program. And a lot of congressional members were opposed to the show because of the themes of homoerotic and sadomasochistic imagery, and they felt that federal money should not be going towards this type of artwork. So it set up a huge commentary and a huge discussion about where monies from the National Endowment for the Arts should go, and a big debate about that. So that's good because it's making people have to think about art and how impactful it is, no matter what the theme may be, no matter what the subject matter may be. But he was trying to make a statement on the importance of he being homosexual and the community that's out there, and almost like having to hit somebody with a sledgehammer with these images and these photographs to wake people up to a community that's become, during this time in the 80s, like a subculture. And that's why he did that. He made it very in your face so that you recognize the importance of not just the homosexual community, but all communities in general. But with the self-portrait that we have here with figure 32.8, it's very powerful. Now, it may not seem too powerful with just this one image, but it's a series of images, and it's a series of photographs after he found out he had AIDS. After he had got AIDS, he started taking pictures of himself as he's deteriorated and withered away and ultimately died. And he died just a couple months before his show went up, that was funded by the National Endowment for the Arts. And so he was not present for that exhibition. And the series of photos show him withering away from having AIDS and dying from AIDS. And then alongside the withering of the body, it's also has the androgynous, kind of the change between male and female, and the categorization that you can kind of see here a little bit on his left side of his face. There's more makeup and he's made up to have this feminine quality, and on the left side is more of the masculine, male-like quality. So he plays with androgyny with these self-portraits, and then also the decay of his body from having AIDS. Okay, so very powerful. So that's Mapplethorpe. And now let's talk about a piece in national identity, and we're going to look at figure 3213. Neshat, Sirin Neshat, allegiance and wakefulness. And what national identity is about is a focus on identity of someone who has moved away from their original place of birth and is residing in another country. For example, Neshat moved to America, originally born in Iran. And what she wanted to do is she wanted to show what is going on in Iran at a particular time. So that's what national identity is about, is to reveal and commentate to the overall public what is actually going on in these countries, and maybe the reason why that individual no longer lives there or their family no longer lives there. So what Nashat wanted to show was Iranian information, and she used films, videos, and photos to display it. Here is offset print with ink calligraphy, and the calligraphy is what's written on her feet. And so this is a photograph. And what she wanted to do is be critical of, she was choosing to be critical of fundamentalist Islamic regime in Iran at that time, and how women were treated by this fundamentalist Islamic group. So she wanted to portray that here with the feet of this woman, and she completely omits the face and the body, which is meant to speak to the idea of how the burqa is covering up most of the body as well as the head of the women in these fundamentalist Islamic countries, in particular Iran here. So she omitted that part of the body, but she revealed the feet, and she revealed the feet as if it's a book or information of what's going on in Iran at this time, or whenever she grew up in Iran. And on the feet, it's covered with verses of militant script. Okay, so using the feet as the canvas to show you what this militant regime and governance was like growing up in Iran. And then, of course, she used the barrel of the rifle to point at the viewer, to make it a focal point so that you go right to the feet, and then start reading this text through translation if need be. So she has three main focal points to have you focus on, this almost this self-portrait, if you will, allegiance and wakefulness, and that is the rifle, the barrel of the rifle, taking you right to the middle of the feet themselves being lit in a way that is separate from the more darker cladded background, and then of course the fundamentalist Islamic militant script that's on the feet as well. So really making you have to focus and hone in on the commentary of her national identity coming from Iran, but the reason why she ended up leaving that country is because of these, in her opinion, unsafe and kind of unsafe environments. Let's just say. I don't want to speak too much for her. Okay, so that's an example of national identity. Now let's take a look at political social commentary, and we're going to look at Botero, and that's going to be figure 3218. Now, we can't go over every single piece in this chapter, or again, like I said, each chapter would take like a whole semester. Right? There's just so much that's being developed. But I encourage you, when you get a chance, when this whole COVID stuff finally calms down, is to get out into the museums and the galleries, and go check out some contemporary artwork. So with political and social commentary, it's what we've looked at up to this point is more individual based. Okay, with like Nishaf, whenever we talked about Willie, when we talked about Ringo, we talk about Maplethorpe, it's about commentary on an individual level, and how that connects to a very specific group, being part of a very specific group. But with political social commentary, it's less about the individual conflict that one is dealing with on an individual basis, and it's more about conflict for all people, all right? What all people may be facing. So it's more of a macroscopic look into political and social commentary instead of an individual or a microscopic of personal individual commentary. So what Botero is doing here is he's creating an outcry against war. And how he's doing that is by depicting what the treatment of prisoners look like. And what this specific painting, Abu Ghuraid 46, is about treatment of the American military to the Iraqi prisoners during this time, during the 2000s. And it's not, and this specifically is the place in Iraq, Abu Ghuraid, where these Iraqi prisoners were placed. And these things did happen, like they were stripped, they were bound, they were blindfolded, they were beaten, they were bloodied, they had ferocious dogs barking and biting at them, and they also were forced to wear women's underwear. Okay, that's what happened. It's a political social commentary on what is actually documented. And this painting is an example of that. And then Botero's style is to have these inflated bodies. It's something that he would do with other paintings that weren't specifically political and social commentary. So that's why the bodies are a little inflated. It's something that is very specific to his style. Now, yes, in this case, it was the American military with these unfortunate forces upon Iraqi prisoners, but he is stated to say that it's not anti-American. It's not meant to be that. What it's supposed to show is that it's a violation of the Geneva Convention, which is that prisoners are supposed to be treated a very specific way. They're not supposed to be shamed, brutalized, tortured, tormented like this. And it's more of an anti-military, general anti-military for anybody in charge that's allowing these atrocities to happen to prisoners. It's not meant to be anti-American. He just chose that as the specific theme on what historically happened in Abu Ghraib. So it's not meant to be anti-American. I just want to state that. But it's supposed to be a commentary on what is happening to prisoners, and specifically what happened to the Iraqi prisoners in the 2000s. Now, one positive note of this is that any sales with any of these paintings that he made as political social commentary, he does not accept any profit from it. Anything that is made, he donates, and he donates to the causes that help support any anti-war, any anti-poor imprisonment of prisoners. So that's where the money goes for any of the proceeds go for any of these paintings. Okay, so that is an example of political social commentary. And now let's look at an example of representation and abstraction. And we're going to look at figure 32.22, Seville, branded, from 1992. Now, still, because a very specific artist, European artist, modernistic artist, that we've already talked about in past chapters, because of their presence and their acclaim, like Salvador Dali and individuals like that, and even Picasso, so late into his life, were so strong and prominent in Europe that it led to more incredible paintings in abstraction and representation. Now, abstraction is looking at an object and exaggerating it. And then representation is looking at an object and trying to paint it or render it specifically like how you see it with your eyes. So representing that object in the painting versus abstracting are looking at that object and then modifying it, magnifying it, making parts of it diminutive, parts of it large. So that's an abstraction and a representation. And Seville is a combination of the two. So she's abstracting certain angles, but she's also representing a self-portrait of herself in figure 32.22. So why is Seville painting branded like this? What is her? What is, again? This is contemporary art is all about commentary. And what is her purpose? What is her commentary? And what it is first of all, she wants to keep figural art on the forefront. We've looked at a lot of artwork where it's really not that much about the figure. Okay, it is, but there's definitely more about the commentary of the figure in an environment. And a figural art is all about the figure itself. Okay, the figure is the subject matter, not what is the figure doing in this environment. Okay, then that changes the whole dynamic and modulation of the point of the painting is whenever the figure is engaged in an environment versus the figure being the environment, the figure being the subject matter. And that's what Seville is about, on making and keeping figural art in the forefront. And that's what she's doing here with Branded. And she would create these oversized, life-size self-portraits. Okay, this is 7 foot by 6 feet. Huge. You step into a gallery, and this is just going to be so powerful on the wall. So it's greater than human size. It's her intention. And she wants to show folds, she wants to show veins, and she wants to show minute details. Again, that's what emphasizes the importance of figural art, by showing all these details, showing the folds of the skin. Again, this is her showing the folds of the skin, showing the veins, and then also showing the small little details in the body. And she wanted to do that sharp foreshortening that we see here, which is something that was heavily used in parts of the Northern Renaissance, is that foreshortening. So she's very much about using some of those classical, or those, classical techniques that were coming out of the Renaissance, and even early Renaissance. And then by creating this sharp foreshortening, it actually distorts the proportions, which leads it into the realm of abstraction. The realm of representation here is the representation of her body, but the sharp foreshortening from the bottom of the canvas to the top of her head is creating a disproportionate look, all right? A diminutive head, in relation to how truly proportionate it would be with the rest of her body if you were looking straight on. By having that sharp foreshortening, which is a sharp diagonal perspective from the bottom to the top, it creates a little distortion in the proportion, which again yields to the idea of abstraction. Now, branded is meant to be comments on little body fashion models, in particular. So it's a commentary on how at this time in the 90s that the small body, thin body of the fashion models was very much embraced and accepted. And she wants to do the antithesis of that. And her commentary is made by using words that are branded on her body. Okay, so there's the painting of her body, but then upon her body are words such as delicate, decorative, and petite. All right, which is a commentary on, at first, when you read those words placed upon this body, you might think that has nothing to do with this body, but the relevance is the commentary on how certain things are expected in mass culture awareness and cognition. And this painting is she's branding herself with these terms to make you aware and in your face about how these things are not the true natural look of a woman's body necessarily. So she's commentating on using these contradictory statements that are used in society as like formula to create these little body fashion models that were out there in the 90s and the 2000s, and how those terms are actually not, they're used more as like tools and instruments to create a certain molded type of female body versus what actual female bodies or what other options of female bodies look like, that aren't meant to be molded. So it's a commentary on being aware of that and realizing that there's a whole spectrum of different body types, and that was her commentary using the figural art in herself, branding herself with those specific terms to make us aware through her painting of the again, the spectrum of all different body types. Okay, so we'll leave the video at that and we'll move into the next section in the next video.